water, you made this?
Video games. Don't we all love it? Gaming goes back all the way to 64 years ago. That means we've been throwing red turtle shells at each other for a while now. And trying to save Princess Peach and Princess Zelda many, many, many times. I know a lot of gamers might have gotten their first start on the GameCube, then it translated to the Xbox, and then went from there to the PlayStation 2. I mean, those three consoles themselves had a huge impact on gaming and gaming culture in general. From there, we moved to the PS4, which I'm sure a lot of you have great memories on, and now we're all the way up to a PlayStation 5. Pretty crazy to think there's 5 iterations of one console. Gaming is now really a multi-billion-dollar industry due to the fact that, well, we love gaming and it's been around for many, many years. Gaming really has become iconic in our generation and has really created a whole new social platform for people to go on. The passion gamers have for their favorite characters and brands is immense, and companies know this and use this to their advantage, unfortunately. With many unfinished products releasing like Cyberpunk 2077, every single Ubisoft game in existence, I mean, gaming's at a dire state right now where gamers should start to push back against unfinished products with their money and put their money where their mouth really is. One thing that's for sure is gaming is not going anywhere in the near future and is only going to get better and better from here, with VR and AR becoming very, very popular nowadays. Soon we may see gaming transition to a whole new medium and be used for activity, exercise, and a lot of different things. We'll just have to see what the future lies for virtual reality. And for this reason, we caught up with the owner of Gamers Anonymous and New Game Plus to discuss the community they've built around retro gaming and gaming in general, and get a better understanding on Jonathan and why he started up Gamers Anonymous. The amount of games and consoles they have is really just crazy, and it's almost like in a museum to go in there and walk in there for the first time. It's really an experience. Without further ado, here's Jonathan Sakura to give you some insight on gaming.
All right, so my name is Jonathan Sakura, owner of Gamers Anonymous here in New Game Plus, and I've been into gaming for most of my life. I used to go to the bowling alley with my parents when I was a kid, and while they were off bowling, I'd be playing the arcade games out front, stuff like Mario, Galaga, things along those lines, and just sort of congregating with like a group of other kids and hanging out and having something to do really sort of sucked me into it, to the point where eventually my parents got me a Nintendo, thinking it would sort of, quell my thirst for a couple months, and then instead it just sort of took off into this whole thing. As far as favorite games, I mean, the laundry list is pretty massive, but it's a mix of like modern and retro. Super Metroid is probably my favorite game of all time, but games like Breath of the Wild, Chrono Trigger, F-Zero GX, Bayonetta 2, Contra, Shattered Soldier, Mega Man 9. That's sort of like what rounds out like around a lot of the top picks that I have. So Gamers Anonymous was actually opened in 2003 by a friend of mine. And 2007, he decided that he wanted to sell. So a friend of mine that used to shop there all the time approached him, and he said, look, if you guys are interested in buying the shop, like I want to get out, I want to, do other things with my life. So I took over in 2007. A couple years later, my partner left to pursue other things, and so I've been running this place for about 15 years. Oh, it's crazy to have seen like the growth over the past, like 35, 40 years. Being tethered to a television was always sort of like a standard. It was sort of expected. You had something sort of big set up in front of you, and that was always going to be the case, whether it's a PC or a console. But then once the Game Boy came along and started like really changing the climate, it wasn't the first portable machine, but it really it had interchangeable cartridges, and it made things, like a lot more dynamic. And to see that portable gaming has taken on like such a massive life of its own, I feel is actually due mostly to the DS and the 3DS, which came out, like 15, almost 20 years ago. That changed a lot, and now that the Switch has also come about and given people like this extreme portability, companies like Valve are also following suit with the Steam Deck and things, and I feel like not being tethered with wires any longer to something is really going to be a huge part going forward of what gives people that sort of freedom of not just what you can play, but where you can play. You have a lot of license holders that have since moved on, companies have become defunct, and you have IPs that are sitting there floating around with no actual protection. You know, the event that like a company wants to revive a game, you know, sometimes it becomes public domain, and sometimes you have to dig deep to see if there's like a license holder even available. And the internet itself at large, I think, does a very, very good job of keeping these things sort of alive, but it's important that not just the community, but the large companies do what they can to protect those assets existing, basically. I think it's extremely important to make sure we don't lose the history of any games that were created prior. That's a fascinating question, and oftentimes I don't necessarily have like a great answer. I feel like I know it costs time and money to port things, especially, you know, because you don't know what the actual reception is going to be. I understand why a company might be hesitant based off the fact that, like, you know, if we put this money to porting something, what is the return we see from it? But at the same time, you know, these are coming from multi-billion-dollar corporations that can do so. And as long as they maybe have like source files or original, you know, ROMs or ISOs somewhere, it's still preserved to a degree. But I feel like providing access of those games to modern gamers who don't have access to them is something that could still strengthen the legacy a lot more, you know? We've definitely seen a lot of companies that have shown that there's interest in these games, but people have no way to access them. Piracy, I think, can be a dangerous door to open only in that if you try to justify picking up games for free, that can hurt like a smaller company's bottom line. You know, sometimes that association of, oh, if I pirate this Nintendo game, it's not a big deal because they have billions of dollars. And if that mindset leaks over to a small independent company, that can hurt them a lot more. That said, I don't think piracy, especially of inaccessible games, is necessarily a problem, because if you're to try to go out there and say, look for, some old Sega game or Nintendo game that is no longer printed. We'll say Little Samson, this is a good example, it's an $800 NES game, and it's only $800 because there's so few copies circulating out there in the world. However, it's not an $800 experience. So if somebody wants to play the game, a ROM is an acceptable answer because there's literally no other way to get it, and no one other than a collector who wants to physically own it should be paying that kind of money simply to play an hour-long NES game. So piracy, I think, is tricky. In fact, I almost want to separate what piracy and emulation are. Piracy potentially taking away from a company's bottom line can be tricky, especially, like I said, because of the independent companies. But emulation, in order to get an experience you simply can't get anywhere else, I have no problem with, because my job is to try to get people to play any game they want to play. And sometimes that gets really tricky because, you know, costs of collectability versus costs of playing are two separate things. The market has always been very fluid for us, but I think once people during the pandemic had no choice but to start shopping online for things, like it threw a huge monkey wrench in what like an average and plateaued value would have been. So it's not uncommon for them to fluctuate, but it is interesting to see them fluctuate to this degree. Nearly everything has doubled in price. We really value the preservation of video games and what those tangible experiences are like. You know, there are a variety of ways to play games, and we like giving people the best authentic experience that we can. So we have My Store Gamers Anonymous and our gaming center New Game Plus, which we value as a place that gives people the opportunity to own and experience games the best way we can, which is together, tangibly, in person, with one another, with physical things you could hold and enjoy. And obviously, you know, do whatever makes sense for yourself to enjoy video games, but also come visit us and see what that experience can be when we provide it for you. Go to garetro.com. We also sell a bunch of cool like merchandise and shirts that we make, and also the newgameplus.com to see all of our events and stuff coming up for our community.
I hope y'all like Jonathan as much as we did. I mean, he was really a nice guy, and he didn't have to give us the time of day to let us record in his store and do an interview on him. So again, thank you, Jonathan, if you're seeing this. And without anything further to tell you guys, I guess roll me playing the bongos. Thanks.